Hey folks, this is Riker, and let me tell you about my play experience with the new Diablo 4 class, the Spiritborn, on July 18th, when I return. In this video, we'll talk about how some sorcerer experts in D4 weigh in on how screwed the class is in Season 5. We'll discuss a number of other Diablo topics, but we'll also talk about how George R.R. Martin is teasing an Elden Ring TV show, the bugger. Path of Exile is teasing Boat League, and last Epoch dropped some new details about its upcoming Harbingers of Ruin patch. But first off, Blizzard invited myself and a number of other content creators to Blizzard HQ to try out the Spiritborn next week, July 12th. Since I'll be out of the country, there will be no news video next Saturday the 13th, and I'll be able to talk about my experiences with the Spiritborn on July 18th, so stay tuned for that. But before I move on, a word from this video's sponsor, Torchlight Infinite, an ARPG that strikes a great balance between casual fun, slaying tons of monsters, getting lots of loot and leveling up fast, while still having a lot of depth to it. They just launched Season 5, which is a huge update to the game. It's basically Torchlight Infinite's annual big update. There's a big focus on loot hunting and build diversity this season. We got increased drop rates for legendary gear, and now you can actually craft on legendary gear. We're going to see legendaries be a much bigger part of builds now. They're adding a new hero trait for Carino called Zealot of War, who wields a huge Gatling gun. The season-themed Clockwork Ballet lets you select a special modifier every time you enter a Netherrealm stage, and then you have a limited amount of time to collect a bunch of steampunk gears scattered on the map, and it all culminates in a season-exclusive new boss, the Silverwing Dosseuse. They're also adding new legendary gear like the Heels of Hands boots that can automatically trigger empower and defensive skills, and a pair of rings whose powers complement each other, almost like a set bonus. There's new pact spirits, new cosmetics, a complete overhaul of Netherrealm trait cards. They're tossed out, replaced with a new progression system called the Void Star map, and they made a bunch of quality of life adjustments, including the ability to automatically switch out your Pact Spirit build setup depending on what gameplay you're engaging with. They've also extended the free talent reset to level 90 and more. So check out the latest season in Torchlight Infinite. I always have fun jumping in and blasting up at the start of a new season. Click the link in the description and use gift code TLSS5451 to get 300 Jagged Primal Crisps for free. Now, getting into Diablo 4 news. Last week we spoke a bit about the state of sorcerers in upcoming Season 5, and in short, not looking great. Well, Wowhead interviewed two top sorcerer players, Roxy and Makuna, who were able to shed extra insight. Check out the full interview, link in the description, but basically, Roxy said that the nerfs to Flame Shield were expected in order to stop the immortal playstyle that it enabled, being able to keep that immortality shield up all the time. But the ice armor changes were a big hit to sorcerer survivability, and the teleport cooldown increase was just adding insult to injury. And Makuna agreed that the ice armor nerf seemed unnecessary. Roxy believes that sorcerers will be really squishy in Season 5, and the only time we've seen sorcerers shine has been due to things unintended by the devs, like the ball lightning bug in Season 2. To try to fix sorcerers, he'd like to see a return of the third enchantment slot that was said to be available to sorcerers in pre-release versions of the game, but also just an entire overhaul to the enchantment system to make the lesser and never used effects more viable. Makuna feels that sorcerers are just poorly balanced relative to other classes. They lack proper base damage and defense, and with the Flame Shield nerf in Season 5, sorcerers will have basically no damage and no defense. While Makuna isn't opposed to adding a third enchantment slot, he doesn't think that's going to really help sorcerers at this point. And he also seems unimpressed with the new toys that sorcerers are getting in Season 5. Roxy believes that in order to save sorcerers in Season 5, the devs need to revert the ice armor nerf, buff spells and not just passives, and rework spell-specific uniques to increase build variety. Also add the third enchantment slot, and allow sorcerers to equip an additional item the way that rogues and barbarians can. And that's a tall order. Reverting ice armor, that should be easy enough for the devs to do. Buffing spells, yeah, they can probably do a balancing pass and fit that in time for season launch. We just have to pray that the final balance is going to be good enough, because we're not going to get another PTR to test. Reworking uniques, again, feasible, but without a PTR test, yikes. There's just a lot of opportunity for the changes to either be not enough or result in something broken. Third enchantment slot, actually probably not too difficult to do since it was already in the game at some point, and the balance of adding that should be fine. But adding an extra item slot, that is a lot of work. I think, at least. Now, it's no coincidence that Barbarian has consistently been a top, if not the top class season after season, and it's the class with the most item slots. 4 weapon slots versus the 2 weapon slots that Druid, Sorcerers, and Necromancers get. And if either of those classes want to wield a 2-handed weapon, then that's giving up yet another weapon slot. Whereas Barbs never have to give up a slot to carry a 2-hander. At times, they basically have a 3-slot advantage over most other classes. And every additional slot is basically an additional source of multiplicative damage. So it's just really hard to keep Barbarians in check when they have so many more opportunities for creating powerful item synergies. In a game in which items are such a huge, significant source of your character's power, giving one class more items than any other is a huge advantage. And it just makes it so difficult to balance. Now, another topic I see brought up in the community is pit balancing for group play. Now, right now, group play in pits is basically disincentivized. One person puts in the materials, and that person gets the bulk of the rewards, meaning in a group of 4, 3 out of the 4 people aren't maximizing their rewards. They're also not paying a price, but they don't even have the option to pay a price and get more rewards. They have to make it up in volume. Additionally, anyone dying cuts time off the run, so one person dying over and over punishes whoever put in the materials. Now, that last part isn't super relevant. If you're pushing pits, then it is. But if you're speed farming, you're not going to reach a point of failure. And also, pit materials have turned out to be so bountiful that it doesn't really matter if you burn some. You're just wasting time effectively. However, for those efficient runs, when you get into the groove of just efficiently grinding out your resources, it does mean that you have to do rotations within your group, taking turns putting in materials so that everyone is benefiting equally from grouping up, which is just a tedious thing to track in an otherwise very smooth gameplay loop. Pits offer probably the smoothest gameplay loop of anything in the game until you turn it into a group activity. And it seems like the current implementation was designed to solve edge cases, but it's at the expense of the most common way people want to run group pits together. And it's another example of Diablo 4 having to relearn the lessons that we learned in Diablo 3. In D3, when rifts were introduced, and pits are just the evolution of rifts, it took one key to open one rift. So one person would open the rift for the entire group, just like pits in D4. So what happened? People would want to leech and get as many free rift runs as possible. Back with pits, everyone got equal rewards there. And so what happens is in random group play, there was sort of a gentleman's agreement that everyone would rotate through to open rifts, but then tons of people would just leave the game when it was their turn, or otherwise they would just refuse to put in a key saying they don't have any or whatever. So that system was problematic, and it resulted in some interesting community-driven efforts like the Rifted Forward community that would hook up people who wanted free rifts with people who could clear the Rift Guardians and get the rewards. But ultimately, the game was massively improved when the devs just made the change that, hey, if you want to enter a rift, you have to pay a rift key. Everyone has to pay. It fixed so many problems. It was just overall a good thing. And that happened literally 10 years ago. This was a lesson that Diablo learned 10 years ago. Why can't we just have that system in D4? If you want to enter a pit, you gotta pay the resource. We're not seeing exactly the same issue with pit runs as with rift runs, but the problems still revolve around reward structure and entry cost, and the simplest solution seems again to just be let everyone buy a ticket to enter the amusement park. If there are concerns about this making group play too much more efficient, too much more powerful than solo play, then just scale difficulty per player a bit higher in pits. While I do appreciate the concern that is shown to solo players with a pit, in order to not make players feel like they must group to be efficient in pit runs, I'd rather see that accomplished in a way that doesn't add some kind of bookkeeping memory game of, oh, who's the next one to open the pit? Is it me? Is it you? We took too long and Jim just went ahead and opened it again. And all of this ultimately ties into a much bigger discussion that I'll just touch upon here. ARPGs ultimately become games of efficiency. Not everyone plays for efficiency. I know we're going to have people in comments saying, well, I don't play for efficiency, and then that's fine. But the most effective tactics always boil down to making the most efficient use of your time to farm up as much XP and items and resources per hour. Why slam your head against a high difficulty when you can casually farm at an easier difficulty and end up with more rewards per hour? Why do group pit runs and get less reward per run on average when you can just do solo runs and get the max reward every time? Why do solo Uber boss runs when you can coordinate with 3 other people and get 4 times the boss rewards by rotating through all of your materials in your group? Any player who wants to follow the meta gets funneled into a certain way of playing the game, and every player has some degree to which they are willing to accept inefficiency in the interest of their personal fun. But the more efficient something is, the harder it is to sacrifice efficiency in the interest of fun. If the difference in efficiency is 5%, yeah, everyone's going to pick fun over efficiency. But if it's like 100 times more efficient to play in a less fun way, hardly anyone is going to pick the fun way. It's why devs of ARPGs have a very difficult job to do, which is to ensure that the most fun way to play the game for most players lines up with what is the most efficient way to play the game. And they got to ensure that when there are great discrepancies in what players find fun, for instance, some people really like playing solo, others really like playing in groups, then you got to ensure that the efficiency difference is negligible. Now, outside of that, another big ask that I see for Season 5 from the player base is to bring back the profane mind cages of Season 4. A lot of people don't even realize profane mind cages were just for the season. And they were a way for us to opt into greater reward for greater challenge inside of Helltide, and I do believe in Season 5 they actually increased our base Cinder drop rates, which is nice. Having those 10 extra levels of challenge in Helltide kept things more interesting during the leveling process. Once you're maxed out on your build, it doesn't really matter whether the enemies are level 5 levels higher than you, or 10 levels higher than you, or 15 levels higher than you. You're going to obliterate them in a one shot regardless. But before you reach that point of maxing out your build, those extra 10 levels of difficulty in Helltide could often turn it from easy difficulty to moderate difficulty. And I think losing the mind cages will make Helltide a little more boring now. But that's my opinion. What about you folks? Will you miss profane mind cages? I should mention, I'm also open to them not being a consumable. I don't like consumables in general. So, it could be something like, why not just make it a shrine that you find in Helltide? You pray to the shrine, and then your difficulty is increased for an hour, or until you die or whatever. It would mean less consumable bloat, less things to pick up, less inventory issues. Hell, we actually have those shrines in the game already, right? Those shrines, you go emote in front of them, and you gain some super short-term buff. They're effectively so useless that most people don't even know they exist, but they're a cool mechanic. It's a neat little thing in the game. How about make those the mind cage altars? You emote in front of them, and then your difficulty in Helltide is increased. Although I guess then it will be annoying that if you die, you gotta go back and pray again. Hardcore players now are like, softcore problems. Oh, one quick thing I hope they can work into Season 5. Distilled Fear, Exquisite Blood, Living Steel. Is there a reason these stack to 50 and not 99 or any other big number? Is it to incentivize us to consume them? Because again, it's just more stash bloat. One big topic I see come up, and this has popped up as a concern from way before launch, stat bloat and damage bloat. We're at a point in D4 where millions and even billions of damage are being dealt at times. And some people are hoping to see a stat squish for Vessel of Hatred. Basically just, bring down all these numbers across the board so we're not fighting bosses with quadrillions of health. Now, I personally don't really care either way. It doesn't matter to me whether we're doing 1 billion damage to bosses with 1 trillion life, or whether we're doing 1,000 damage to bosses with 1 million life. But how about you folks? Does it matter to you? Sound off in the comments. And to wrap up the Diablo news, I just want to highlight that the Hell 3, a mod for Diablo 1, has entered its beta stage. This mod is a complete overhaul of D1 with 6 player classes divided into 29 subclasses. There's a few dozen dungeons, there's increased character caps, high resolution support, functional multiplayer, more item types, new affixes, crafting and enchanting, and a lot more. If you want to relive Diablo 1 in a new and expanded way, you should check this one out. Then in Helldivers 2 news, a hotfix deployed this week fixed superior packing methodology and introduced level 5 ship modules, which have quite a hefty price. In fact, we're getting close to these things costing the existing resource caps. A lot of these seem to cost 200 rare samples when the cap is 250. And rare samples are pretty hard to get as well, for that matter. My favorite of the new ship modules is the Sentry upgrade that makes mortars prioritize firing at marked targets. That is huge. Oh, and then we have a new major order that's teasing the unlocking of weaponry from Helldivers 1. Could be referring to some old stratagems. Exciting. In Elden Ring news, patch 1.13 went live this week, which included bug fixes and balance changes. Some noteworthy things include the Black Knife Tish was bugged, and it was healing enemies, so that's been fixed. They also fixed a bug causing rolling sparks to deal more damage than expected, so now that's fixed, that is a nerf to rolling sparks. Oh, Smith Script Dagger got a buff to its range, and you can check out the full patch notes in the description. The creator of the Seamless Co-op mod has been hard at work. He had to rewrite the code for the mod, but it now supports Shadow of the Erdtree. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of bugs right now, so you may want to hold off a week or so to see if you can get some more bug fixes in before you start your co-op run of the game. Then one last interesting thing for Elden Ring. George R.R. Martin is hinting at a TV show coming up. Martin, writer of the Song of Ice and Fire series, which was adapted into the Game of Thrones TV show, who also wrote the lore for Elden Ring's setting, recently posted on his blog, quote, "Oh, and about those rumors you may have heard about a feature film or television series based on Elden Ring, I have nothing to say. Not a word, nope, not a thing. I know nothing, you never heard a peep from me, mum mum mum." What rumor? Could be nothing, could be George Martin is just a massive troll, could be Martin coming up with literally any excuse to distract himself from finishing Winds of Winter. Who knows? Maybe there will be an Elden Ring show. If there is, it definitely wouldn't be about the game, because the game really doesn't seem suited for that format. But the lore is so rich, and there's a lot of opportunities for stories to explore within the lore, particularly in the backstory. Then in some Path of Exile news, we got a teaser for the upcoming League, and at long last, it seems like the community is finally getting the boat league that they dreamt of for years. Although it wouldn't surprise me if this is yet another bait and switch by the devs. We're also seeing hints that the League mechanic may be related to Settlers of Catan. And speaking of Boat League, the Path of Exile X account casually dropped that Expedition was originally intended to be Boat League, but then boats were removed from the design. Hopefully we don't get trolled again. Then in some last Epoch news, we got more details about upcoming patch 1.1 this week, the Harbingers of Ruin, the new cycle set to launch July 9th. I'll have a full video discussing everything, but this patch is looking great. A new enemy, Aberoth, the Herald of Oblivion, will be a new pinnacle boss, but we must first defeat his Harbingers before we can tackle him. This adds a new level of progression and challenge to the endgame. They're also adding an evade button, a bunch of new items, some great quality of life changes. They're making it easier to progress on alts, which is fantastic, and much more. To get into a couple specifics, mana will now regen while channeling on most channeled skills, so this is a big spin to win buff. There's a new unique item that lets you basically dual wield shields. All blessings that you've unlocked can now be stored, and you can just swap them out without having to go refarm them each time. This is a huge quality of life buff, definitely about my favorite changes here. They've also added 2 new ranks to the Circle of Fortune and Merchant's Guilds. They've reduced the time it takes to reach the highest ranks within them, and they've revised the rank rewards to allow for smoother progression. Again, I'll have a full video coming up soon. And that's going to wrap up this week's video, but do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed the concerns that I have about Diablo 4 Season 5. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Special thanks to my supporters, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.